Hello health champions, welcome to the Wellness Code. Today we're going to talk about what would happen to your body if you quit sugar for just 7 days, and for one thing you'll probably notice improved energy. And why is that? Because sugar is a very unstable energy source, and the thing that determines how you feel and what kind of energy you have is called your brain. And the thing about the brain is that it never rests. Most of your body cells, they have kind of circadian rhythm where they're very active and very inactive, but the brain doesn't do that, and therefore the brain needs stable energy. And how stable? Well, the brain is about 2% of your body weight, and it uses 20% of all your energy. So it's about 10 times more metabolically active than your average body part. And the baseline, the average energy consumption of the brain in the typical person is about 20 watts, so it's like a dim light bulb, if you will. And if we look at that graphically for comparison, that would be about that size of a bar. And then if we compare to the absolute most active that your brain would ever be, it only goes up by less than 5%. So graphically we can see that it's just barely, it's almost indistinguishable from the baseline level. And when you're sleeping, the very lowest that your brain ever slows down is about 18 watts. So you can see here how the brain activity, the brain energy consumption, which again determines how you feel, it almost doesn't fluctuate at all. And when you're awake would be the green and the red bar here, that where you really see no difference. So if we compare to muscle, for example, that could be 100 times more active or 1,000, I don't have the numbers, but you get the idea, when it's active as opposed to when it's at rest. Whereas the brain is a very unique organ in that its energy demands fluctuate very little, and the brain is what determines how you feel and what sort of energy you have to do different things, and that's why the brain needs super stable energy. So if we use the analogy of putting a log on the fire, something that burns very steady, and for a long time, the way the body works is that the brain likes to have a very stable energy level in a very narrow range. And if you eat sugar, or you eat something processed, some processed starch like white flour, your blood sugar is going to leave this ideal range, and it's going to go super high. And when it goes super high, the body has to bring it down very quickly, so it comes crashing down. And sometimes the body is pretty well tuned, and it can make it level off in this narrow range. But for most people, especially if you abuse the system over time, then it's going to start crashing, and it might go well below this level. And this is where you feel horrible, you have no energy, you get cravings, and your body just doesn't work, and your brain doesn't work. Whereas if instead we eat the equivalent of the log on the fire, which would be fat and protein and fiber and non-starchy vegetables, now you can eat as much food as you like, and it is not going to leave this ideal range, unless possibly if you have already sort of destroyed the system and really messed up that carbohydrate handling machine. So in order to feel good and have energy, your brain needs this stable and ongoing energy like this green line. So therefore you need to cut out, you need to stop or dramatically reduce sugar and starches. And then, like I mentioned, to get this log on the fire, what you want to do is increase fat, protein and fiber. And if you understand what I just talked about, then you also understand this is why humans are not made, we're not designed for diets that are very high in sugar and refined starch and processed foods, which is most of what people eat today. And it is why we run much better on fat. They're basically two sources of energy for the body. They're two fuels, one is fat and one is carbohydrates, and the carbohydrate will create this kind of behavior, this kind of blood sugar spikes, and it will do it more the more processed it is. Whereas the log on the fire, the whole foods with some fat and protein, are going to exhibit this behavior, and you can start moving from blood sugar spikes to a more level energy supply very quickly. In a matter of days you will start noticing this if you're strict with it, and you can do this if you stop the sugar, but especially if you also at the same time start to cut back on your carbohydrates overall, and you start eating more whole food that have a lower glycemic index, and you also cut out what we call white trash, which is the white and processed sugar, flour and oils. So the carbs, the processed foods, the high glycemic food is all going to create these type of spikes, and if you cut back on those and eat real food, then you're going to get this energy supply instead. And if you improve that brain energy, obviously you can also get better mental clarity, and something that a lot of people complain about, which is brain fog, can actually lift and start improving very quickly. And I want you to imagine the effect over time. If you all of a sudden can start thinking more clearly, if you have better focus, if you have better productivity, you get more done when you do things, and if you can make better decisions, just imagine if each one of these gets just a few percent better, than the compounding effect of thinking better, focusing better and making better decisions over time that can be truly life-changing. Next thing you notice might be less bloating, and this is another thing that maybe the majority of people are complaining about these days. It's like, who doesn't have bloating, right? So sugar feeds the bad gut bacteria, and the bad gut bacteria, they're the ones who make the gas, especially the kind of gas that makes people want to leave the room, and these are what we're calling pathogenic species. They're the bad bacteria, they're the ones that have grown out of proportion, that are out of balance, imbalance with your beneficial bacteria, and most people have severe bloating, probably have something called SIBO small intestine bacterial overgrowth, because where you get that bloating, that gas expansion soon after a meal, is because you're feeding the bacteria in the small intestine a buffet of sugar and carbohydrates and even healthy things like fiber, but these bacteria are in the wrong place. They're not supposed to be in the small intestine, they're supposed to be further down in the large intestine, and you're supposed to have absorbed all the food and all the carbohydrates in the small intestine before it gets down to the large intestine, and if you absorb it before it ever gets to the bacteria, now that's where you don't get all the bloating. But once you have a condition like SIBO, once you have an imbalance of these bacteria, now there are also other carbohydrates that can create problems and feed these bacteria. So even things like fiber, which is a type of carbohydrate that we normally can't digest, but we do have some bacteria in the large intestine that are normally digesting these, or starch, which we want to avoid for the most part. But there are some things that, like a sweet potato or a tubers, that have some starch in them, and again, if we absorb that stuff before it gets to the bacteria, now we're in good shape. And there's also another group of things called FODMAP, which stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols ends with OLS, and that means that all of these sugar alcohols that are popular to add now as sugar substitutes, that most people can tolerate a tiny little bit, but if you start, that sugar will cause blood sugar swings. Whenever you eat sugar, you will have spikes and sharp drops, and what that causes is it causes disruptions in cortisol, because whenever your blood sugar goes, eating sugar and processed carbs will disrupt your cortisol all function, and what happens now is that regulates your sleep cycle, your circadian rhythm, and that is the hormone that puts you to sleep. So with plenty of well-regulated melatonin, now you can sleep like a baby. But if you eat a bunch of sugar and it starts disrupt regulating the cortisol, now this cortisol is going to very effectively shut down that melatonin, and that makes sense, right? Because melatonin puts you to sleep. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and if you have stress, if you have danger, if you have an emergency, obviously that's not the time that you want to sleep. So this is one of these mechanisms in the body where cortisol kind of overrides a lot of things, because stress is about survival. So now obviously if you dysregulated cortisol, now you're also going to shut down sleep. Benefit number 5 of stopping sugar is that you will be on your way to weight loss now in a couple of days. Not a hole is a drug. It is very, very highly addictive. It stimulates pleasure centers in the brain, and it's the majority of chronic diseases and the majority of things that kill people. So by cutting out the sugar, you will start improving your blood sugar control almost immediately. You will start lowering your insulin levels, and you will start improving blood pressure possibly, and all of these things can start happening within days. It'll probably take a while, like weeks to months, to start getting lasting benefits, but just the fact that you can start making changes in days to where you can notice things is pretty amazing. So now here's my challenge. What if you just decide to cut out the sugar? And a lot of people get intimidated when you talk about doing it forever or doing it for a month. It's like they've never done anything consistently for that long. So that's why I'm suggesting let's just do it for 7 days, and don't even feel the burden of the 7 days. Just make a decision to start, and then you just take one day at a time. And if you can do one day, then just wake up tomorrow and see if you can do it again. And while you're feeling like you're on a little bit of a roll from that euphoria of that decision, now try to stay positive and ask yourself honestly, how am I feeling? How do you feel? And you will probably notice that a lot of the things that I started talking about are already better even within a day. Some of those cravings and those taste buds and these small changes are starting to happen. And next you ask yourself, do you really miss it now that you're feeling good and you can at least maintain the idea of real whole food, of juicy nice food? Do you really miss it? And if all is still good, and well, let's just do one more day. And if you start tacking on the days one by one, now before you know it, all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're feeling absolutely amazing, and you've lost all the weight, and you've experienced most of the things that I've talked about, and now you're ready to add that nice comment, that testimonial that you can read hundreds of thousands on all of my videos of people who have changed their lives. They're feeling better, they've lost the weight, but more importantly, they can do things that they could never do before. They go to their doctors and the doctor says, I don't know what you did, but you don't need these medications any longer. Or maybe you have one of those doctors who say that everything looks fantastic, I don't care what you did, you really don't need these medications, but let's just keep taking them anyway. And that's when it may be time for you to start looking for another doctor that can support your health journey based on your goals. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video. Welcome to the Wellness Code.